much of what we're preoccupied with right now is not the game on Saturday, sadly, and not the remaining games on Florida State's schedule, which includes, unfortunately, another rivalry game with Florida that we ought to be intensely concerned with, but instead it's an afterthought because of what happens immediately following the year, which is a relatively quick turnaround, not only with the staff changes that you've got to make, but the portal and signing day. I mean, all of it. It becomes on the horizon, and it's imminent. And it's all that consumes us now after a season like this, which is what changes are going to be made. December, as you and I have pointed out to our listenership, and certainly we've to some degree lamented to each other, is one of the busiest times of the college football season. It becomes the time where you ratchet up the intensity and focus. And that is especially true this year when so many things have to change. And you're just going to wonder on a daily basis, what kind of news leaks? Does Florida State have an in on a player that will help change their fortunes on the defensive line? You and I were going to discuss that defensive line earlier. Now we're going to be looking intently because they're going to need a lot of help there depending on who comes back and who doesn't. Portal in general, intense focus. And, of course, the coaching staff changes. How soon are those announcements made? And then what can Florida State put together to put some sort of finishing touch on a class that, frankly, may rank well outside the top 25, top 35?
Yeah, right now you're watching the games, but the season is in December. This is something I think it was early last week talked about and saying that, hey, 2 months from now, you're going to have a hell of a lot more answers. As we get closer to Christmas Day, you're going to have a lot more answers as to what the program that you're watching, the program that is going to help define whether Mike Norvell is here long-term or not, is going to look like. Coaching changes, what young players on the roster decide to ride out, what players we tell, to have a good day. Might not present that way into the media, but, it's just that we're parting ways with a certain player they announce are in the portal. Maybe it's because we wanted them to go. What guys would be considering Florida State? Could Florida State make any 11th hour runs at some unexpected recruits because they're going to open the briefcases? They got to make a splash at some point the Wednesday after Florida. Maybe that's something that happens where if you have a coaching change, look, it happened in the span of 24, 48 hours when Jeremy Pruitt left Alabama after they won a national championship for Florida State. He brought Jalen Ramsey and DeMarcus Walker with him, as I recall. Yeah. Two very nice additions to bring with you, and it was basically because they were in his back pocket because he was their primary recruiter. So maybe there's a swing that happens after the Florida game like that sees you get a couple extra high school yeses than you were anticipating on a signing day. And so while the class is not something that you're going to write home about and you're not going to talk about years from now, you got a couple of pieces you didn't expect. Signing day, again, is the Wednesday after Florida, and then the 8th/9th is the beginning of the portal window opening. So within 10 days of December 1st, you are going to have major changes two ways for Florida State's roster, and then the coaching staff changes will have occurred, I would think, in the 24, 48 hours following the Florida game. I would have thought some of them would have happened by now, but this is it, man. This is the stuff that is going to define whether next year is one that you feel like you're armed for the fight, that you can at least compete, or if you feel like next year is a play out the string year where what are the real changes coming and we're kicking the can down the road. December is critical for that, and it's not that far away now.
It's interesting. I was talking to somebody the other day who's very close to arguably my favorite player in Florida State football history, Marvin Jones. And I got to thinking about his son and his role on the team this year. And we're sitting here solving for the future and talking a lot about what we think is going to happen and where they should concentrate their resources. And, I begin by talking about the offensive line. And, I'd spend an awful lot of time on your offensive line. I'd probably ride with one of these young quarterbacks. I don't think I'd go in the portal and get a quarterback. I'd try like hell to keep both these kids, really advertise this as one hell of a contest in competition that starts in the spring and just see what you get. Now, hopefully you can keep them both. I don't know that you will, but that's what I'm crossing my fingers for. But on the other side of the ball, I began to think about what you need to look at. And again, per our defensive line conversation, you do realize that Marvin Jones Jr. played both ways in high school. He was a tight end as well as a defensive lineman. And I know you got two young, really talented tight ends, but I was told that Marvin Sr. and others thought his future was truly going to be that of a tight end. Did you know that?
No, the recruiting isn't necessarily my lane. Not necessarily, it's not at all my lane. But he was recruited as a defensive lineman, everywhere.
Everywhere, because that's where he did most of his work, and he doesn't have a prolific history of catching passes, but he did.
What's interesting is that according to at least what I'm hearing from Amari Williams' camp, he really wants to go to the other side of the ball and play defense, and he wants to play defensive end. Could you do a switcheroo there?
A little flippity-doo, being discussed on the JCS today during Solving for the Future. Hey, I know this. I've watched him do it in practice. Marvin Jones Jr. can run, can really run. He's 6'5", 257 pounds, Tom. If he's got hands, let's go, because he hasn't provided much of anything at all as a defensive end.
Well, I would say, and this is not tongue in cheek. This is just me being an evaluator. How does he feel about contact? How does he feel about blocking? Because I see somebody who's explosive on third and obvious as a defensive player, but I really like when Lola Hay is out there on the rundowns. I like when Lola Hay is out there in general. I wish he had another year of eligibility.
I don't disagree with you about that. This is all the more argument for maybe we take Marvin and put him on the offensive side of the ball.
As a tight end, though, it's not like you're free from getting contacted and having to block and responsibilities that require physicality. Maybe it's that he would just rather have the reward of the ball in his hands, and that makes it all easier. But he's certainly a piece that you're going to have to place on the board in a way that it's not being placed now, because you got Lyons. You got KJ Sampson.
I like Lyons and Sampson a lot.
You've got Marvin. If Peyton wanted to come back, would you take him? I don't know.
You would take him, because it would mean that he didn't get what he wanted in terms of an answer from the NFL about draft stock, and he would have no choice but to show out.
Well, you could have argued that was what this year was about, and
you could have, and I'm not in disagreement.
I'm gonna give you 50% of what I gave you. What do you think of that? Because the thing is, every dollar counts now. Every dollar counts. So that's with the defensive line. I'm sure the two interior guys are going to go. Daryl's only getting better as time goes on. Farmer's done enough, I think, to go play.
I think Farmer's done enough. Daryl may have the body type and the ability at the combine to change his fortunes to a much higher draft grade than he's going to receive based on the season.
But if he continues down the path, he's like, if he finishes with 5-6 good games in a row, that'll put him on the radar in a way that he's not right now. But the last two efforts have been very, very good out of Daryl Jackson.
They have been. It's what we've been waiting on forever. It's really such a shame. It's just taken so long. Would have loved to have seen it be impactful, say the first couple of games of the season. Yep. I don't know. It will be fascinating. I want the concentration to be on the line of scrimmage. I want to see the effort and the monies spent on defensive linemen and offensive linemen. Whatever happens from there, whatever you're able to bring in at the other positions, in particular the skill positions, it will matter, but everything is made possible by what you are on the offensive and defensive lines. And frankly, we haven't had a lot of depth on the defensive line this year that has made an impact at all. They haven't been a frontline defensive line, but they haven't been terrible. They don't get a ton of pressure on the quarterback. They did this past week against Miami, which was why it was even remotely close. And obviously, the offensive line has been an abject failure. There's no getting around that. So I would put my monies in the offensive line. And in fact, I'd overstock it. I'd have so many players. You're like, good God, we got our 9th offensive lineman in the portal. Yes, we did.
Yeah, that's got to be the first priority, because beyond trying to win football games, you got to score points next year. You're fired if you don't score points next year. You're an offensive coach. This is one of the worst offenses in the country. Yeah. There's a couple of ways you can go 7-5 and 8-4. But I would rather go 7-5, 8-4. I think it's in Mike's best interest if you do so, even if you lose a couple of games 41-35. Because you need to touch 30 a little bit more often. So when you're assigning the pie charts, what goes where, offensive line, offensive production has to be way of a higher priority than defense.
Yeah, and like you said, they're going to end up having to overpay for all of that. They really are. But I that's fine. I mean, you don't have a choice.